Hey everybody. I've been thinking, reflecting on all kinds of things, and enjoying Daniel Schmachtenberger's podcast called The War. I think it's on Rebel Wisdom, called the War on Sense Making, which is absolutely brilliant and perfectly articulates concerns that I've been exploring and trying to understand and researching for 20 years. And he's got such an incredible framework that orbits these concerns, and he can articulate it with incredible clarity in a way that's absolutely compelling for me. Maybe absolutely is a little bit too strong a word. But what I'm thinking about, and what I've been thinking about for a long time, are some topics related to time. And I just want to show you one form of time. And what I want you to notice about this form of time are a few very specific things. The first is that although what you're looking at is a representation, these living beings, their temporalities, comprise a symphony. And that's the symphony our humanity was born in. That sound you might hear out there is not symphonic. It's dysphonic. It's dystonic, right? It feels bad. And in the garden, I'm still inside, I'm in a little bubble, inside what we refer to as society or civilization. And we can break that up in various ways, from the universe to our solar system, to the solar family, to the earth, to the United States, San Francisco, this place. Living time is a symphony in which most of the time, everything, the fact that it's alive, helps all kinds of other things come to life. In case you didn't notice back there, there weren't any explicit examples of competition. And I think our sort of game theoretical, zero-sum game ideas about competition in nature are blatantly misdirected. But in here, in this garden, with the living beings, time comes to life. And we'll actually sing at you about this and explode into visual splendor about this, except that explosion is so slow you can't see it happening. You just see the bud one day, some petals the next, the flowers the third, the full blossom the fourth, and so on, right? But down there, here's another kind of time. And you see this barrier? That barrier is real. But it doesn't keep that stuff from invading. And that kind of time out there, it doesn't come to life. It comes to death. It eats up everything it possibly can to keep making more noise, more disturbances per minute, more events per minute. I'm curious, how many events did you see occur when I showed you the living time? Were you getting like notifications on the leaf? Were people trying to text you through the flowers? Was your boss suddenly, needing that emergency thing that compared to our lives is absolutely trivial, yet in our representational cultures rules everything? Now maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but I'm Italian and occasionally prone to hyperbole. But the intervals, and this is really the thing about time, it's hard to understand until you finally wrap your mind around the fact that every living being, and even the beings that comprise living beings, each one is a unique participant in and expressor of temporalities, meaning things like what's the speed at which change occurs? What's the rate? Yeah? And what is produced, what is transformed from one thing into another over that interval? Because the living beings are transforming, not merely substances, but we can think materialistically. They're transforming the nature of being. And each of them have different rates of growth and maturation and death and fertility. And these and when they transform, one of the things they transform is time, but another one is space. So they're like time-space transforming beings, like this one. And each one creates unique dimensions of meaningful transformation, of symbiotic relation. So there's this incredible symphony going on in all the living beings. And you can trust it. It's truthful. It's not abstract. It's not an idea, it's not a theory. You can bind to materialism if you like. And I don't entirely reject aspects of materialism, but to think of them as fundamental, as having precedence to the mystery, the beauty, the splendor, the pathos, the heroism, the adventure of living beings, I would dismiss all of abstract thought and every invention instantly if those two things were put, if I had to choose between them. Because the natural symphony is the origin of our lives and minds, and not just at some time in history. That's what an event looks like in this context, right? It looks like an organism, something alive, something I can learn from, all kinds of things, not merely theoretical things, not merely abstract things. I can learn about my humanity by observing and participating meaningfully in the living places, and you can too. We have to learn how to. Most of us have forgotten, even if we recognize the comfort and the beauty of living places. That's different from participating in them meaningfully. Though positive surveillance is a very, very powerful capability that humans have, and it's not without value at all. It's quite meaningful, but to participate more organismally in the living places, we have to form meaningful relationships with the place and with its unique ecologies and organs. Yeah? We as humans have the capacity to make friends with living beings. And it doesn't necessarily always look like a cartoon, which isn't to denigrate the times when it does. Sometimes it's very nuanced and subtle. But my point, or rather the direction I wish to travel in, is to talk about intervals. The time of living beings, like this one, it's not comprised of discrete intervals. It's liquid. It flows. Right? It hasn't been divided into minutes and seconds and femtoseconds and so on. Right? It's flowing into life. And this is the kinds, this is the important form of temporality that we have lost contact with in general, though, again, there may be some among my audience who have recovered some degree of relation with living time and living beings. But over time, as what we call our society or civilization has advanced, by which apparently we mean something really bizarre, something like, well, we can start killing everything in more new ways per second than we ever did before. Including our own minds and bodies and hearts and relationships and futures and so on. So I guess that's a kind of advancement. I mean, cancer can advance, right? It can become malignant and then metastatic and can just go apeshit, at least within a single body. And often within groups of bodies where there's a particular carcinogen present, which there is everywhere. But some places have, are really poisoned. And even a short exposure can result in oncogenesis. Now see how many events you detect on the other side of the fence. And, we're looking from outside that space. So, you're seeing, 50 machines per minute, 45 machines per minute. And inside those machines are human beings relating with other machines, like smartphones and radios, and there's all this intense activity intended to fill up, first to create new invasive intervals, and then to fill them up with shit, right? Signals and noise and fucking, broadcasts. Now, why am I so upset about broadcasts? Hey, everybody watches things. I watch things. I used to listen to the radio when I was a kid. It's not... The purposes that underlie the constant intrusion of new kinds of invasive signals and noise and events per second is ripping our minds apart. Did time change for you when I stopped making face noises and turned the camera toward the living events? Did you experience any kind of transformation of your local temporality when that happened? I did. Extremely significant transformation. So much so that I'm a little skeptical about my agenda of continuing to make face noises. Because the living places can demonstrate something it is impossible to encompass in mere words. Something very shocking has happened, and many people would say our society is in crisis. I think that's hilarious. That's like saying I don't even know. Our society is crisis, right? It's been crisis for a long time. We've just been busy playing other games and listening to noise, and now, the repercussions of the activity primarily of nations, corporations, and institutions, I guess the consumers are involved too, right? We've got a role because we support all that activity by buying in. And we're kind of the targets of a vast array of predatory forces that want to convert us to broadcast their memes. So our minds, it turns out, are a lot like wombs, and they can be effectively fertilized by intrusive ideas and theories and positions and perspectives and prerogatives. And then we become, contagious. We become broadcasters. We rebroadcast this noise, these mimetic contagions. Many of us, a lot of us. And even if we don't rebroadcast them to others, we'll rebroadcast them internally, right? We'll have everyone figures out where they are on wearing masks and then tries to tell everyone else. They start broadcasting, and because we're concerned about this thing, all of us, though some of these concerns are relatively bizarre, we become involved. And we may feel threatened, or we may feel like, well, I'm an outsider, but I'm going to stick to my guns. Care and caution. Care for other beings can't be overrated. Like, it's a direction you can really trust. And even if the comfort is merely symbolic, which it nearly certainly is not, it's a lot more difficult to err on the side of truly caring and learning to become more aware and more capable of understanding a very complex, layered book of situations that we're facing. But I'm going to go back here for a moment. I'll skip over this relatively contentious topic. It's not as contentious as many people think, but there are forces at play that want to get people rebroadcasting memes that will get people killed. And in that situation, I tend to become a little more actively concerned rather than philosophically concerned, as I might otherwise be. Because I was born in the 60s, I remember times, unlike people who were born, I remember times before the people who were born, say, let's go 20 years after me, 20 to 30 years after me. And it's impossible to convey to you how much more time we had and how less crammed with events per second it was, and how much less stressful that was. And this is part of why people go on vacations, hopefully, maybe, is to escape the ever accelerating grinder that's just pounding, events into our moment-to-moment experience. We've invented new places for there to be new events, right? And smartphones, computers, the internet, we thought they were going to make life more convenient and that we would be able to do things more effectively and efficiently. But there's this weird process in technological cultures that it just absorbs, right? If you make the task more efficient, then we can do more tasks per minute of different kinds, right? It just absorbs what we previously imagined would be the resulting liberties of having automated a process. And then, it intrudes directly into our bodies and lives so that even when we're at home, many of us, we're still at work. And there's no boundary. It blows boundaries apart. This whole prerogative, this whole campaign of, let's do it faster. Let's do it more efficiently. Let's skip over time. Let's time skip. And part of what we're doing is we're compressing tasks. And then we're making a new domain that begins relatively open, into which new tasks get compressed, like when we invented smartphones, cell phones and things. This is a terrifying monster. And part of why it's terrifying is that it ensures that most of us are too busy with trivia to have actually anything resembling the mind with which we might otherwise engage in meaningful activity and relationships. We're getting buried in task noise, bizarre obligations, and the burial is proceeding at an ever-increasing pace so that there's more and more layers. And one of the results of that in general, there's a lot of them, is that people get dumber faster and they get sicker faster. More people get dumb, more people get sick, and more people are converted to shells, essentially. Shells of what they might have become in a context that supported and nurtured their growth and creativity and humanity and intelligence and their capacity to connect deeply and meaningfully with each other and form something that actually resembles a society. And to connect deeply and meaningfully with nature, thus experiencing something that resembles humanity. Our modern world is a swarm with abstractions, and each one invents a new kind of dead time. In a way, precisely the opposite of what's going on where I'm walking now. And do we really want more and more new kinds of dead time? because with each new kind, part of us dies with it. So I'm suggesting that in learning about these things together, that in exploring them and reflecting upon them, that will at least give us the possibility of understanding why we feel so overwhelmed and like we can't get enough time. Human beings will stay up, even though they had no sleep the night before. They will stay up late into the night, doing something usually relatively meaningless, even to them. But so that they stay up in the hope that if they just stay awake, maybe some beautiful thing will happen so that they will have had some experience resembling being alive that day. Even if it's just, an interaction with a friend over the phone or the internet. Most of us, it's like we're being fed rocks in the dimension of relational time, right? And by the time night comes, we just kind of want to throw that up and hope that maybe we could have something nourishing, meaningful, beautiful, adventurous, heroic. There's no space for that in modernity. In our modern cultures, that gets evicted from everything and pushed to the outside of our lives. And that's really tragic because our lives are brief. We don't realize it at first. Most of us feel immortal until we're directly faced with death. Then we begin to get the sense of like, oh, wow, this is a limited engagement. This has an endpoint. And it's really easy to just cram our lives full of garbage, again, 20 times a minute. And we can feel totally helpless about that. Even though we do make choices, it's not as though all of us are free to choose, primarily because we need money to survive in a society that's a capitalist society. Even to survive in a communist society, there's a vehicle of exchange, right? There's an abstract vehicle of value. And that might be the very seed from which many other evils sprout and bear young and invent new forms. So I have compassion for people everywhere because we're all scrambling while we're awake, many of us, just to try to keep our head above water financially, or hopefully we have relationships. And that's really tragic, and it's extremely common. The vast majority of people are so poor that a single year of my ordinary income might be more money than they make in their lifetime. And then we have bizarre examples where I guess Jeff Bezos made $13 billion yesterday or something. Once you've got mountains of money, it's really easy to make more. When you've got a very small amount of money, it's very difficult to sustain oneself. Wow. Wonder why they did that. Perhaps it's an important analogy. So, if the diversity of the branches of these trees and all their leaves and all the living beings they relate with is like living time, let me show you what the result of dead time looks like. It looks like this. It looks like that. In our hearts, in our intellect, in our creative selves, in our psyches, in our relationships, in our vocations, dead time looks like that. It was a cypress tree. I don't understand exactly what happened here, but I suspect that the arborists decided that its branches were too dangerous, in that they might suddenly, unexpectedly break off and land on someone in the garden. So, to protect passersby and the gardens from liability, that's what happened. Maybe the tree will continue to grow. I cannot tell. They didn't cut it all the way down, they just took all its branches off. And sometimes that's how I feel at the end of the day, when my own life has been filled with largely meaningless work and, tasks and signal and response and and I suspect it's familiar to most of us. Okay, so that's a mechanical sound that I hate. That's the sound of terrified geese being projected on loudspeakers. And it's been turned off for a while, but someone made the decision to turn it on. Originally, this is supposed to be a sanctuary, right? But this is precisely the thing I'm talking about right now, okay? In order to control the gardens, some extremely ignorant humans decided it would be a good idea to put in this sanctuary loudspeakers that project the sounds of terrified geese for about a mile in every direction. And it has no effect on the geese, but it makes the gardens unbearable. The geese don't care. In case it isn't obvious that the geese don't care, there's 80 of them. And they will happily come right over here to where these speakers are installed. We'll hang out here for a minute. And the humans will produce noise that has no effect on the geese, but definitely affects the humans and the other animals. This thing does not belong here. It accomplishes nothing other than making misery and fucking up the temporalities that are natural to this place. The problem it's supposed to solve is both that the geese are not controllable animals, they can fly in and out, but also they make feces. right? So somebody decided, it was actually I think the head of Parks and Rec in San Francisco, to install that loudspeaker about 3 years ago, I think, and I stopped coming to the gardens when that happened, and I've been so relieved not to hear it. They often run it all night too, which is even weirder. Though I can imagine some purposes for which that might happen. It has a frequency of about one array of signals per 10 minutes. That's the interval. But one of the things I wanted to highlight before I wrap up is that all of the intervals in nature are liquid and flow together in communion. The harsh, sudden, intrusive intervals that we experience in our culture cut things apart. They slice things up. And sometimes those things are our hearts, and sometimes they're our actual bodies. Now, I don't want you to just think, oh, well, Darren's just saying he's a fan of living time. I certainly am. But I want us to be able to think, oh, here's some events. That's kind of how time is in nature. It's not a bad representation. Membranes and manifolds. Of course, the soap. The soap is probably kind of toxic, yeah. Humans really like to be entertained, but there's nothing as entertaining as true relation, as meaningful relational behavior with and for each other and the living beings. So entertainment becomes another, right, intrusion. Yeah, it's a way to fill up that space with more dead time. Rather than living adventurous and meaningful lives, we observe others do it, pretend to do it, in dramas that are vaguely analogous to dreams we watch on screens while awake. But that analogy is poor, very poor. Dreams are ambiguous, fundamentally ambiguous. Here's some events. Of course, I don't see them as events. But I mean, this is the opposite of what events in our lives are. These are living beings. It should be pretty obvious that the signal from the loudspeaker has zero effect on these animals. But once somebody installs it, see, now they're identified with it. Now their reputation is associated with those loudspeakers. And so they'll make claims like, well, it reduces the population even if it doesn't get them all out. They'll make all kinds of ridiculous claims that I've looked at and are completely nonsensical. These geese are going nowhere. they live in a city. They're not wild animals, although they are, they are both wild and not wild animals. They're para-domesticated animals. They're quite used to noise. And they are a people. And you can see, if you watch them as a group, you can see features of what I was talking about, right? They are temporal. There's an interval, right? These little, they're grass grabs. They're transforming grass into goose. Okay, so there's the loudspeaker. Do they seem troubled? Do they look like they're paying attention at all? Not much. A little bit. Some of them haven't heard that sound before, right? So the ones to whom the sound is new, they're paying a little bit of attention, but not in the sense that's going to drive them away. I mean, these geese are basically just resting. They don't care at all about the loudspeaker. But I do. It's cruelly invasive. I care about living time, and I'm aware that the incredible sort of self-hyperbolizing processes that keep inventing new domains of intervals and inserting them into our lives is crushing us as human beings. And the first step in doing something else is just being aware of that difference between living time and the time that is imposed on us when we're relating with abstractions. Abstractions of value, abstractions of meaning, abstractions of adventure, abstractions of relation. Our cultures are infested with this, and they're just explosively, continuously producing more. So some of us will choose, once we begin to really understand this, to step aside from that, to find and make a different path. We'll still be subject to some of it. I am, but I live in a city. Events per minute outside that gate are radically higher than events per minute inside the gate. And almost all of the events outside the gate are mechanical or task-based. And almost all the events inside the gate are alive. Let's choose the right gate together, shall we? Bye-bye for now.